Hello and a warm welcome to everyone. We would like to wish everyone a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Samantha from Safeopedia, and here at Safeopedia, our mission is to support the EHS professionals, operational folks, and any safety-minded individuals with free safety information, tools, and education. Just a reminder, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording as well as the slide deck to everyone in a few days. This webinar is for you, the audience, so let's keep it interactive. Make sure you get your questions or comments into the GoToWebinar console, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. And if we don't have time for questions today, I will make sure to pass on all of your questions and comments to Corey and Ewan. I will also be dropping a link into the chat box once the presentation starts, so please take a look out for that. Today, we're proud to present safety metrics to take your organization beyond zero. This Safeopedia webinar is being brought to you by SafeMap. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenters, Corey Pitzer and Ewan Alexander. Corey is the CEO and founder of SafeMap International, a company specializing in the psychology of risk. He consults internationally to many corporations in mining, utilities, military defense, and construction, all with occupations in which people can be seriously injured or killed in their work. Corey was an infantry platoon commander, an underground miner, and he has done every dirty job to earn money for his studies. Corey enjoys skydiving, motorcycling, and race car driving. As a result, he knows more about risk than about safety. Ewan is the COO of SafeMap International. He is responsible for the development of processes and systems that deliver healthy, safe, and environmentally responsible operations for companies with significant risk. Ewan has held significant leadership roles in operations, sales, and health and safety and the environment, providing very broad leadership experience and clear understanding of how to make rapid, sustainable culture change within organizations. I am very grateful to have you all sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. With that, Corey and Ewan, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Samantha. This is a very exciting time. We are very excited about this workshop and about the things we're going to do in this workshop. We are doing some very exciting work at the moment, and this is this thinking beyond zero. How do we actually get there? How do we actually measure there? And what does it look like? So today, we're going to share with you some actual metrics that you're going to participate in. And we're going to measure them wherever you are in your organization, how you see it. And then we're going to share it back with you to say, this is what you look like. This is what the metrics tells us about you and what it tells you. So where does this all come from? I started working in the mining industry in South Africa, platinum mines. And these mines in South Africa are extremely deep and dangerous. And just to give you an idea, you go down in these cages, mine skips, and you go down underground into the belly of the earth, and you go down in some of these mines, you can go down 3,000 feet with one shaft. You walk to another shaft, you can go down another 3,000 feet. You walk to another shaft, you can go down another 3,000 feet. There are shafts there that's over 12,000 feet deep. I worked on a mine, and this was my work environment, my stope where I worked. It is only 39 inches high. It is 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Above your head is 9,000 feet of rock. And it was a strange experience. At first, I'm a psychologist. I ended up here because the mine manager told me to go look at what people really do in the mine. I had to get a blasting ticket, and I spent there a good amount of months, 8 months training. And in this environment, I think I learned everything to this day that I know about safety. But looking back, I was connecting dots. And some of the dots that I connected was this. We would have a great day at work and a great week and a great month. And an accident would happen. Yet we were doing so well in everything that we did. Other times, things were going haywire. We didn't know what we were doing. Production was just rushed. We couldn't get things done. And then accidents didn't happen. And I couldn't figure out what is it that makes this happen. And while I was employed in this organization, a mine disaster happened. This is it was called Gencor, the company at the time, and a mine disaster killed 177 people on a safe mine, on one of the best mines in the company. It was a safety protection of the side walls and the hanging wall that caught fire. It's a foam, and that's what killed people. Safety actually killed 177 people there. I started with what we called then a Gencor Safety Performance Review. This was a look at fatal risks on organizations, catastrophic risks on organizations. So this company had over 60 mines around Southern Africa, and I designed a process where a small team of about 12 people, 6 visitors, 6 home people would come together, and over a week they would identify these risks and catastrophic exposures. Later on in my career, and as a matter of fact, 3 years ago, another big mining company engaged me to design and co-facilitate a similar process, which was called elimination of fatalities. And this elimination of fatalities process was basically focusing on discovering risks, serious injury, fatal and catastrophic risks. And it was like a random process that was we engaged in. But here's what happened. Teams of people, we were again a team of about 12 people working in pairs. Teams would go out and engage with workers at the front end and really challenge their thinking. What is it that you see here that can kill you? And then also further than that, what is it that they don't see that can kill them? And it was like a deep dive into the processes of the organizations. And we used a lens that we designed many years ago already, but it's a practical look at the way people engage with risk. It's not a fancy academic definition. It is very practical, very focused on how people see or don't see risks. The first lens is why people overlook risk. They don't see the risks in their environments. Why and how they underestimate the risks that they deal with. The third lens was how are people incentivized to take risks. The fourth one was how do people take risks because of production pressures, need to complete work, and what risks are inherent in the process, in the procedure. There's nothing they can do. They know about the risk, but it's inherent in the design. And then a capture area, how we tolerate risk. And this is a lens that we used to really scrutinize the whole workplace. Everything that was happening there, we applied this lens to. And this gave rise to what I called the coefficient of chronic unease. And we've done a previous presentation on this at the National Safety Council. This coefficient is the first drive into what really happens beyond zero. And I was working with 2 very distinguished safety experts, and executive manager Brian Maynard and Mike Byrne, and we developed this coefficient of chronic unease. Now, today, what I want to do is to go further and have a look at some of those coefficient of chronic unease metrics, but also other metrics that happens beyond zero. Now, this is very much, we talk about complex things, complex science, and we talk about, this is not rocket science if something is simple, as if rocket science is very complicated and complex, which it is. And this is why it is. This is a rocket thrust formula. And what I was attempting to do is to develop a formula in safety that is as comprehensive as this. And that's the formula that we called the coefficient of chronic unease. Okay, I think everybody has done it. Let's have a look at a quick introduction to what you just done. If you look at the safety performance in the United States since 2003, and now you'll see some very interesting trends there. If you look at 2008 beyond, you'll see that there's a slight increase in number of fatalities in the United States. And the same trend actually goes when you look at the fatality rate. From 2008 onwards, there's actually an increase in the fatality rate in the United States. So we are killing more people per 100,000 employees than 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And this happens in different categories as well. So why is this happening? You look at the performance on incident rates. Incident rates up till 2008 has improved 64%, since then flattened out. Fatality rates have improved by 32% up to that point and then flattened out. And as you've seen there in the last few years, there's actually an increase in the fatality rates. This is rather odd. Now, when we look at the occurrence of fatal accidents, I want to just recap the black swan theory, because it's very relevant to what we're going to look at today. The black swan theory is developed by Nassim Taleb, and he basically said these are catastrophic events that can only be predicted retrospectively, not prospectively. So once it happens, we know, oh, that's possible. But there's another researcher, and this is all in the financial world, that this was all done. Another researcher in the financial world is Sonnet, a French academic, that developed the concept of dragon kings and said, if there's an element of predictability into an event, he calls them dragon kings. So in safety terms, I've transformed this to purple dragons. So black swans, purple dragons. But not only that, I've added in another color dragon, the red dragon. So now I hope I've stirred your interest in dragons, because we're going to look at dragons in this presentation. So what are purple dragons and red dragons? On the left-hand side, you see a situation with gas bottles stored on various layers. And on the right-hand side, you see a wire going through a loop. Now, this loop that it goes through is actually, this is an emergency trip wire on a conveyor belt. So you can see there that it's been incorrectly installed. There's strain on it. So if it's over that whole area there, this tripwire won't be able to be pulled. So when an emergency happens, somebody's going to get killed because of this deep latent problem. On the left-hand side, somebody knocks those bottles, it is going to happen. So that is what I call a red dragon, something that's imminent. And something that's deeply hidden is what I call a purple dragon. So I want to give you an example. This is an interesting, very interesting example of a latent deep trigger of an accident. On the left-hand side, you can see bags, huge bags weighing almost 2 tons each of a graphite that's being used in the process on the right-hand side. So every other day, 3-4 days apart, an employee would come with a forklift, would pick up this bag here, and would transport it over to this platform, which is about 300-400 yards away. Another employee in this processing plant would arrive, knowing the bag has arrived, and there is, right there in front of him, is a control switch. So there is a crane over there that he brings over, and he lifts this bag up, and then he moves it over the bin. He gets on the platform, and then he cuts it open at the bottom for this to be released into the process. Now you can see here on the left-hand side, because of this angle, the person may, the forklift driver, is going to have difficulty getting the blades underneath this angle. It's a very simple operation, but it could damage these straps here. And you can already see how the forklift has damaged these bags. So it can be damaged. So a few days later, let's assume this bag is damaged. The forklift operator comes and he brings it, he lifts it up, puts it on this platform, he goes away. The worker comes and he lifts it up, and at this point, that strap fails, and this whole bag came crushing down onto this person, killing him. If you think about these two situations, and you didn't know about this preceding events, all you know is a bag strap collapsed and fell on the person. That would be, in an accident analysis, well, it's probably damaged by the manufacturing and poor manufacturing, etc. But this is the difference again between a red dragon and a purple dragon. Deep inside the organization, way back when it was stored, is the cause of this. Now, when I present to you the various metrics, I want to introduce to you 3 ships. The first ship is basically the sailing ship. Think about safety and the level of maturity of safety in the old days, when we had very basic equipment, very basic approaches. That's the more traditional way of safety. The second ship that I want to introduce to you is the Titanic. Now we've developed amazing capabilities, and we've built the safest ship in the world, and it sank on its maiden voyage because of too much safety built into this, too much confidence as a result of it, because people thought, and this is a famous quote, when a crew member said to one of the passengers, "God himself cannot sink this ship. Our ship is unsinkable." Now, there are many events that happened in organizations that are so safe that they became the victim of their own safety. And La Mégantic in Canada, an accident happened where a train was parked on a train line, and the driver was leaving it there overnight for another driver to come and pick up and go further with it. And a whole series of events happened. But in the end, that train, unattended that night, the brakes failed because of a fire, and it ran away and hit a town, La Mégantic, and turned it into that. And 47 people killed. There are many disasters in our recent and further history of organizations like the ones you see on the screen there, who are outstanding performers in safety. They were leaders in safety in so many ways. And then 1 second later, on a day, they had a disaster. And there are many of these organizations that I've studied and published about. And these are typical organizations that I call near zero organizations that are so safe that they become the victim of it. And that's the second ship. So when we place our ships on a scale of maturity, these organizations that I just explained to you are organizations that have hit the wall, like you've seen in those stats, and they've become restrained, deluded, destructive organizations. Those are the first ship and the second ship. The third ship is, and I've used this example many times, is the aircraft carrier of the United States and frankly any other countries. But they land ships, on these ships, they land planes every 42 seconds. I call this the chronically uneasy organizations. And these organizations are incredibly capable at dealing with dynamic risk. They land these planes every 42 seconds. Employees are standing right next to them when they land. They get them out of the way. And when things go wrong, this is what it could look like.
This single-seat FA-18 Hornet traps. The arresting cable stretches to the breaking point. When it breaks, the plane quickly disappears over the side into the water. Freeing saves the pilot, who ejects immediately. This yellow shirt miraculously jumps the cable as it whips under him, not once, but twice.
Now, that is an organization that is chronically uneasy, that is always ready for risks. And this is the organization that I see that has broken through those levels of maturity. And we call these 3 ships: System 1, System 2, and system 3. Now, this is important because those are the 3 types of questions that I gave you in the questionnaire to complete in dealing with this safety metrics beyond 0. So I'm going to just quickly open the PowerPoint that contains these metrics now, and they've been updated. It is on my computer. It has been updated, so I can actually see the various metrics as they came through. So let's have a look at what we've measured in these metrics. We've measured the level of risk transparency, and we'll have a look at that. We measured the way that you review the risk system in your organization. And thirdly, the responses to failure. What happens? What's the response if failure happens? We looked at integration of safety. We looked at fluency of task execution, type of compliance, and the mindset on accident causation. So I'm going to deal with these things, each one, and show you what you've responded. I see that 85 people have completed the survey. So let's look at what did you say. First of all, let's look at the 3 questions on risk transparency. We've asked you to say, which one of those best describe your organization? We have very few, if any, near-miss reports. We have many near-miss reports. That's system 1. We have many near-miss reports and more than 3 hideable ones. I'll explain that. System 3. And we have some near-miss reports, and most are of events that could not be hidden. So here's an example of a forklift driver. He lifts up the bag. I'm not having a case against forklift drivers in my presentation. It's just good examples. And as he pulls it back, it hooks onto the shelf. And he sees it. Fortunately, he sees it. And he moves the bag back. Now, if he doesn't report this, no one will know. Yet this example is also in a store environment. And this forklift driver just touches and it starts collapsing and everything goes and it doesn't stop. Very dramatic collapse and it just never stops. Everything goes down. Now, nobody got hurt in this, so they could report this as a near miss from an injuries perspective, but they couldn't hide this. It has to be reported. So this is the difference between the injury that or a situation that could be hidden and not be hidden. So one of the very famous quotes after the Piper Alpha disaster was the manager of Piper Alpha was challenged. Why did they not know about so many failures and deficiencies in the plant before the disaster happened? He said, I thought everything was okay because I never got a report that anything was wrong. And this is the area of risk clarity, risk transparency in an organization, or risk secrecy. People do not talk. Now, if you have a quick look at various ratios, and I'm just using this a little bit as a tongue-in-cheek, various ratios in nature actually are consistent. The human body, the proportions of the human body, the proportions of a rose, the proportions in the design of the Apple logo, these are all a specific ratio called the golden ratio. You can Google the golden ratio. Now, what I've simply done is say, what's the golden ratio in safety? When we looked at data from a huge database that we have from all these safety elimination of fatalities activities, and we run courses that we call Safe Minds, where we get people to use the 6Y lens to identify risks. Out of this massive database, here's what we've seen. The more transparent, the more mature organizations have a ratio of 1 in 4 for non-hideable to hideable near-miss reports. So if you look at your near-miss reporting and they could not be hidden, then you don't have real quality transparency in your organization. If people report things that they could hide, like the first forklift driver, that is high quality reporting. And if you have a look at the various areas that we just looked at, we looked at these. So let's have a look at what was your assessment of these 3 factors. And there they are. 43% of you actually responded to a system 1 response. 46% said we are a system 2. Let's just go back there to what they were. We have many near-miss reports. We have some system 2, we have some near-miss reports, most of which people could not hide, or we have very few, system 1 and 2. And basically only 7% said we have a 1 in 4 ratio. What this is doing, if I can explain to the right, your exposure. On the right-hand side is the degree to which this approach in your organization exposes you to fatal risks. And you can see there, it is an escalating, near extensive exposure to fatal risks. If it was going below the line, if it was more system 3 analysis or selections, it would have been a reducing exposure. So far, we've got a high level of exposure from the responses that we've seen from you in this activity. So let's look at the review of the risk system. And there were 3 questions there. Safety specialists audit the safety systems. That's your system 2 organization. Leaders review the safety system after a serious event has happened. And system 3, leaders themselves routinely and randomly review the risk system. Now, the reason why this is a very powerful metric beyond 0 is when we look at risk, fatal risks, there's 3 factors that define any risk: exposure, impact, and likelihood. But they are not static. They are absolutely dynamically changing all the time. And a system 2 looks at, well, we've got to focus on our critical risks, and yet a system 3 focus is one that acknowledges that there are many risks in organization and they all change all the time. We see them, we don't. And we have a focus area, a system that actually scans everything in the organization in a very dynamic way. So if you look at system 1, that's the ship 1 organization, they typically look at these exposures with cardinal rules. The system 2 organizations, they typically define them as golden rules or life-saving rules. They define their critical risks in those areas. System 3 organizations have a much more clearer risk register, but they also have very advanced critical risk control systems around them. And more importantly, they have random, restless, and rapid risk systems. So I want to just introduce one of our clients, one of our favorite clients. They're part of the De Beers group, Deb Marine, who have an incredibly risky situation. They mine diamonds from these ships on from the seabed. They've got helicopters flying in and out of here. They've got a processing plant on there. They've got living quarters on there. It's almost like a aircraft carrier. And they have developed some amazing risk systems. They have a risk control system that we call the structure, but these are just the static risks in the organization. They've developed what they call Delta Strike Teams. And these Delta Strike Teams are a network of people trained to be called together anytime by one of the commanders, who's just one of the people on one of the managers, supervisors, and they appear unexpected, unannounced in the area of a team, and they challenge them with unknown, unrelated critical risks. And how do they deal with that? How do they deal with this? And this is what they call the blue teams. They have yellow teams that assess the quality of the risk management systems. They have red teams that looks at known fatal risk events and assess the capability to prevent them. And they have green teams that look at best practices. And also, they have what they call safe sentries. On a particular day, one person of a team becomes a roving safe sentry for 2 or 3 times a shift. the person goes around and does observations, and another day another person goes around and engages with other employees with the 6Y lens, and they discuss risks and they discuss potential fatal risks on a random, rapidly moving process. And this is a system approach that is very much reviewing the risk system in 3 different ways. System 1 is the safety department, system 2 is safety department, system 1 only after accidents, system 3 is what I just explained to you. Let's have a look at the assessment here. Most people said they have system 1, system 2, system 3. So the leaders of the doing the system 1 assessment is 20%. Safety specialists are doing it is 57%, and system 3 is 27%. So that gives you a 49%, and that is an emerging risk exposure. So let's look at the response to failure. How do people respond to failure in the organization? And again, there are 3 systems. They coach and train to avoid mistakes, they punish very quickly, or they're encouraged to learn from mistakes, as the system 3. So here is an example. I'm going to let you make a mistake. I'm going to let you fail. What do you see on the slide? And I'm going to just tell you what you see, because I'm sure you see this. You're seeing a mug with coffee in it, and there's a spoon in it. And everybody would agree that's what it is. When you look at what is really in it, there's a fork in it. So basically, you've made a mistake. Now, you think this is just a simple mistake. Well, this mistake was inherent in the Piper Alpha disaster in which 167 men were killed. Here's what happened. The Piper Alpha had a fire, and they announced the fire to the other oil rigs in the same area, and they stopped production on Piper Alpha. This was 10 o'clock at night, and they shut down production. The other 2 oil rigs continued production, and because there was no pressure coming from Piper Alpha's pipe, their oil returned to Piper Alpha, and they fueled a small fire into a large fire. And the reason they did this is because they assumed that Piper Alpha would get the fire under control, because these are events that are so well controlled on these oil rigs. They assumed it will be happening. Now, just a moment ago, you also assumed there's a spoon in there. So this mistake that they've made and you made led to a catastrophic outcome. How do we train people? How do we respond to these kind of failures that you've just made? Well, when I look at the response to the failure of the the Lamijantik 3 people, the train driver is in the front and the managers behind him, they were treated like criminals. And this is what typically happens in the safety environment. People making mistakes, and there are serious consequences to it, are almost part of the criminal response system. Now, when we look at the response to failure, people are trained or coached, or they're punished quickly in system 1, or they're encouraged to learn from the mistake, system 3. Let's have a look at how you responded. System 1 response, 11.4%. Coached to avoid the mistake, 42.9%. And encouraged to learn from a mistake, 50%. So those are the system 3 responses are actually quite high, and it brings it down to almost the 0 line. You're just emerging as in terms of fatal risk exposure. Integration of safety. Now let's have a look at the various systems here. Many controls, system 2, we rely on workers to control the risks, or system 3, risks are defined and identified during planning phases of the job. Now, if you look at this event, a typical system 2 event is happening in front of you. They are putting this pump in place. They are going to put it on top of another pipe, and they have to align it with a bolt through the holes. And the way this job is designed, they have to get underneath the pump to align those bolts. And you can see what happens now. and they nearly got hit by this and they escaped. But here's what happens typically in organizations. When an organization becomes so focused on protection, a problem that is called risk compensation happens. And this was illustrated by the Swedish switchover in 1967 when they switched from driving on the left to driving on the right. And this is what happens in the stats. The day before, they had a high level of fatal accidents on the roads like that. And then after that day, they started driving on the other side of the road. The accident rates dropped down because people were now seeing more risk. And as they got used to the risk, they see less risk now, they started increasing in accidents again. And this is called risk homeostasis or risk compensation. Like this example in Norway, when if you Google this, you'll see this is called the pulpit rock. Never had they had a fatal accident of a person falling over the cliff. If they built a fence over it, it might change, like it changed in the Grand Canyon, where they've got fences everywhere. And if you Google that, you'll see about 12 people die every year from falling over fences. Because what do people do? They become comfortable and they become content with how they're going to do things. And this is the process that is behind the way that risk is integrated in safety. We have many controls that requires checking by staff. We rely on workers to identify or planning phases. If you have a look at this, and you can see here, you have selected 33% of people system 1, 28% system 2, and planning phases, and that gives you an emerging fatal risk exposure. So let's look at the fluency of task execution. Now, I'm going to give you an example here. Jobs are done slowly because of many controls or haphazard or in a careful and planned way. So here's Daryl, my famous carpet layer. Daryl has to lay carpets, and it's the mayor of town, and Daryl has to go and do a job with her. It's Wednesday, and she said to him, "You must be finished by Saturday because our daughter's getting it's a birthday, and the whole town is going to be here." So there's a lot of pressure on him. He needs to make sure this job is done well. He does his safety checks and field level risk assessments and everything. And it is 5 o'clock Saturday. She's about to walk in and to inspect the job. This is what it looks like. Now, what is Daryl going to do? And we know what Daryl is going to do. It's a thing that he will do and a thing he should do. Let's see what he does.
This looks great. This is yours. I found it on the kitchen table.
Thanks.
Mommy, have you seen my hamster?
Well, isn't he asleep in his cage?
Have you seen my hamster then?
No. Let me go upstairs and look for you. I'm sure. Hold it behind the bed like we've done last time.
Okay.
Now we're going to come back to Daryl, and we're going to finish the story around Daryl, but let's have a look at the fluency of task execution and what selections have you done. System 1, jobs are done in a Russian haphazard way. That's what we think Daryl has done here. System 2, slow checks, and system 3, careful and planned way. So how do you think jobs are being done in your organization? 36% people said system 1, 15% system 2, and a lot of people said 31% in a planned way. And this brings you closer to that zero line. We haven't hit the receding and reduced yet. So let's look at type of compliance. Type of compliance is System 3, 1, 2, and 3, again, different ways of responding. People have no fear to challenge rules, or they readily comply, or they privately bend rules. So if you have a look at what happened at Piper Alpha, the System 2 employees readily comply with the rules. Most people on this oil rig, 167 of them, blindly comply to the rule to go to the accommodation block, which is the rule. That's the evacuation procedure. And that's where they died. One guy convinced 9 others to jump in the sea because he was a helicopter pilot, knowing that a helicopter will not land on a burning rig. And they were the survivors, plus 16 others who fell or blown into the sea. But here's the difference. The blind compliance as against the thoughtful actions. And here we have the pedestrian. Think about this in our workplaces. A typical person in a workplace blindly complying to rules, all the controls are in place, and then something just deviates from the normal and the person is seriously injured or killed. And this is the change in human behavior. We change as we have more and more protection. We change from ignoring to observing rules, to conforming to complying. And then as we get into this pedestrian mode, there starts the problem of compensation. We are starting to feel so protected. And this type of compliance is a key role in how do we look at performance beyond zero. And let's see how you turned out in terms of your assessment. System 1, employees privately bend or ignores rules to get jobs done. 40% people said that's how we do it. System 2, people tend to readily comply. 44% said that. Employees have no fear to challenge rules. Only 13%. Now this puts you quite high. Oops, sorry. Not sure why it didn't want to work there, but it'll put you high in the exposure level. Mindset on accident causation. Let's have a look at the 3 choices here. Safety procedures are reviewed and changed if there's an accident happen, or system 2, the worker is system 1, the worker is seen as the problem, or system 3, the focus is on the management system. Now we have a human behavior model in many organizations still looking at the human being as the problem. People are frustrated, they're complacent, they're rushing, or they don't have their minds on the job, or things like these typical descriptions we have to describe human behavior. Now we come back to Daryl. What is the problem here with Daryl? What is going to happen now? Now Daryl still has something to do here. Look at that. He's killed this hamster. What should he do now? And what will he do now? Well, we know what he should do. He should now call this little girl in and tell her that her little hamster was killed by him. What is he going to do? He's not going to do that because of the system that he operates in the way that accidents have been responded to in the past in his organization. And if we look at this event and we analyze it, so the 5 why analysis, there was human error. Why did it happen? A hamster was killed. Why did that happen? There was poor task execution. Why did that happen? There was a rush to finish the job. Why did that happen? To please the customer. Now, if we regard Daryl as negligent, that's a typical system 1 response. If we say he had his mind off the job, he's made poor choices, or he's complacent, we have system 2 kind of responses. And if we actually go back into the system and we talk to, that's Daryl's boss, saying to Daryl, customer satisfaction at all costs. And maybe deep inside the culture of the organization is what was driving Daryl's behavior. So the mindset on accident causation, this is how you have responded to it. System 1, 19%. Safety procedures are changed, 37%, and 45% said we're looking at the cultural and analysis, and that gives us a 11% result. And that puts us very much into the emerging. So let's have a look at the overall. So what we've done now with all your data is I've applied quite a complex formula to it to identify all these 7 factors, to create a coefficient with it, to say, well, where do you end up in terms of your organization's exposure to risk? So on average so far, you have said 25% of the time you are system 1 selections, 44% of the time you had system 2 selections, and 29% of the time you had system 3 selections. And that tells us that as an organization, if you were all from one company, you had an emerging exposure to fatal risks in your organization. Now, these are the specific areas that you were most emerging on. So near miss reporting and type of compliance and risk management system review, that was your highest exposures. And on response to failure, fluency, and mindset of causation, those were your lower exposure. But overall, the organization looks in some difficulty. The way that this is happening, there is an increasing exposure to risk, fatal risk in your organizations. So coming back and finally to this last, the video I showed you about this person doing this final jump. And this is an organization that's ready to respond to risks. That's not luck. This is the result of an organizational culture and system that is driving some very potent, very proactive behaviors of people on the shop floor. When I worked underground in my stope, one of the things that happened to me one day is we were walking in a passageway back to the shaft. And this is not the actual, but this is the close example of what I could find. As we were walking, a miner walked next to me and suddenly grabbed me and said to me, wait, 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 wait. And I said, why? What's going on? And he says, I don't know, just wait. And as we look forward, something like this happened. And that's where we would have been. And this to me is almost a routine ending for my presentations. We have to redefine safety. We have to redefine safety beyond zero. We cannot continue to define it in any terms towards zero anymore. And this definition is the readiness to respond to risks, to resilience. What I've shown you today is just 7 metrics of many metrics that can be applied to thinking beyond zero. And it is very much a shift away from metrics towards zero, lagging indicators, leading indicators. They are after the events happened. What sits in front of us are red dragons, purple dragons, and black swans. And those is what I call lurking indicators, latent indicators, and metrics beyond zero. That's where we're going. And finally, I'd like to, before we take a few questions, invite you to attend a session. You can send an email to safemap@safemap after today, and we will have sessions with people, maximum of 15 people, where we can go into further discussions and more in-depth discussion and sharing of views on the back of what I've presented to you today. So if you're interested in that, we're going to take only 15 people. Please send an email to safemap@safemap. That's it.
Wow, that was excellent, Corey. So we do have a few minutes here if you wanted to take a couple of questions, or like I said, I will be forwarding all of those questions over to both Corey and Ewan now that the webinar has ended. And as Corey said, there is a workshop coming up. So if you wanted to be a part of that, make sure that you get in touch with us. I'm going to post the landing page for the workshop in the chat box. So make sure you take a look at that. And as Corey said, he's going to be choosing 15 people. All right. I'm just going to pull up the questions here. If anybody has any questions, make sure that you get those into the chat box. All right. So this question here is, how can we measure injury-free events to make a meaningful impact?
Can I take a
Can you
shot?
repeat that? How can we measure an injury-free event?
Yes, how can we measure injury-free events in a meaningful way?
Can I take a shot at that, Corey?
Sure.
Yeah, this is you, and great presentation, Corey. I think the way we've done it, the way I've done it in my past, is you start to look at all things that happen, and you start to look at them in terms of their potential, not in terms of actual. So when you say injury-free, what we did is we looked at what was the potential of that injury-free situation, and could it have produced a catastrophe? Could it have produced a fatality? Could it be a medical treatment case, etc.? And in that way, you start to focus the organization on what could happen rather than what has happened. Now, what Corey has pointed out, when we start to look at latent triggers and we start to look for issues that are in our processes and systems deep in the organization, we don't need an incident to occur. We can start to see situations like that pull cord that would never work that could lead to a fatality. And we would look at that specific situation and call it a high potential, lost fatality type of situation, even though nothing has happened. So the answer to your question, in my opinion, is to look at everything in terms of its potential, not actual.
Excellent. Thanks, Ewan. So we have another question here. What is the place of TRIR-like metrics in a complete safety performance measurement system?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
What is the place of TRIR-like metrics in a complete safety performance measurement system?
Right. I see very little, if zero, place for it. These metrics are invalid in the first instance. They represent failures of a minute proportion of millions of decisions that have been made, millions of potential failures that could have been had in an organization over a period of time. And the fact that it actually happened has a significant element of randomness to it. So it's an invalid measurement in the first instance. And secondly, it is not a reliable measurement because it's fudged by so many factors, fudged by people unwilling to report, not wanting to upset the apple cart, to disappoint, people put on modified work. I mean, industries are renowned for fudging numbers in order to get good numbers on TRFR. It is just not a measurement of any significance, in my opinion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Corey. So before we wrap it up today, I wanted to give you both an opportunity to impart some wisdom on our audience, let them know what they should keep top of mind from this webinar.
I'll go first then. I think the case of needing to look beyond zero was made clear in the early part of the presentation. It's amazing that we actually have the stats to back up this concept that we've had for some time. And Corey presented those in the energy industry, where it was clear where there was an inverse relationship between total recordable injury rate and the potential for fatalities. So this webinar is absolutely necessary, is that we need to move beyond zero. And this is a wide open field where we're advancing our thinking on a regular basis. And I think it's a fantastic topic to which the whole industry needs to move. And I think the factors that we've identified in the coefficient of chronic unease really is moving us in the right direction.
And these things, from my perspective, finally, these things are not that complicated. The systems to produce these kind of efforts to have systems beyond zero that focus on things beyond zero, focus on fatal risk exposures. There are some very practical things that can be done in organizations with great effect, like the Safe Sentry example I gave you. It's a system that's extremely deployable, very practical. People can work with it and they can actually make a contribution themselves as leaders of safety at the front end of their organizations.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Corey and Ewan, for being here today. Again, I want to invite you to join Corey for his workshop focused on the human factor in safety. It's going to be fun, exciting, and powerful. Limited space due to keeping it personal and intimate with Corey himself. So again, thank you, SafeMap, for being here today. Thank you, Corey and Ewan. Thank you to the audience for being here again. As always, we will be sending out a link to the recording and the presentation slides in a few days. So thanks again, take care, and stay safe. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.